Hey, I'm the poet Megan Burns. Going to talk to you a little bit about Unica. I wanted to show you one of my doll babies because this is what I do as a poet. One of the things I do is create these dolls with poems in them and perform with them. And the first one that I ever made back in 2012 was this one for Unica. And you can see that's Unica on the front of her. And she has these drawings that are kind of resemble Unica's type of drawings that she did. And on her stomach it says The House of Illnesses in German, which was one of the books that Unica wrote. Um, and in the back of the doll, she has this little scroll that scrolls out of the back of her. And on the scroll, on one side, are the anagrams that Unica would write. They're translated by Pierre Joris in the English here. And then on the other side is the poem that I would read that I wrote. That's her poem that I would perform with her. Um, but Unica was one of the first dolls I made because Unica is one of my favorite writers and super huge influence on the way I write as a person who writes both dealing with mental illness and that kind of thin line between where a person is performing the poem or they're actually performing the actual experience, which is something that Unica also worked with in her work. Um, this is her novel, Dark Spring. It's one of my favorite books. It's really beautiful, but I thought I would read you a section from The Trumpets of Jericho, which is the most recent work of Unica's to be translated into English. And so if you read a lot of critical work of Unica, you won't hear them talk about this because it wasn't in English, so they weren't really writing about it. You'll hear them talking about Dark Spring and The House of Illnesses and The Man of Jasmine. But this is a really great work, and it's translated by Christina Svensson. And this is a little fable in the back I thought I'd read to you that closes the book. One sunny day, a lonely but not quite hopeless man named Falada turned to his doctor with the following words: "How should I set myself up to conceive a daughter through my nose and give birth to her through my ear, since I love scents and beautiful sounds? Then you should smell and listen for bodily strength. This mixture of ambergris and musk will make you pregnant." And the doctor pressed a small cobalt blue bottle into Falada's hand and told him to assiduously bring it to his nose whenever he happened to be. "You'll notice the first signs of your pregnancy as a light pressure in your left ear. When a whistling and droning begins in your ear, betake yourself to an obstetrician because your delivery will be soon. Goodbye." Falada went about his business, and soon, as of its own accord, a little poem came to him. Swinging in the white cradle, hinged at her hips, little ambergris goes through the meadow. Eyelash fringe shadows sink above the round pink bevels of her cheeks, which delicately. And the song went no further than that, but Falada had found the name for his future daughter, Ambergris. After he became pregnant, for there was a friendly pecking in his left ear, he often and entirely visited concerts and sound paintings that were being performed at the time, and intoxicated himself with music from every century. But when he looked in the mirror, he would have liked to hang his face on a nail because he looked so unimportant, even though he would have liked to be a beautiful father for his Ambergris' sake. On the 33rd day after his conception, and with hymns of joy in his heart, he dizzily went to the birth clinic, behind whose closed doors resounded the cries of pain of soon-to-be mothers. The obstetrician's apron was a single bloody child fright, and Falada proudly turned his eyes away from it because he was certain he would have a bloodless delivery. A head birth, that's how the midwife announced him, and the obstetrician let a hand-wringing, knuckle-whitening piece of music resound on the gramophone while Falada, with the ancient instinct of a father in labor, stood on his head. He then felt how something irretrievable was slipping and slipping out of him, and was caught by the midwife between her thumb and index finger, as he observed with a curious eye. "She even has real fingernails," said the completely dazed and foolish Father Falada, as he looked at Ambergris, who was big as a cat's eye. The heavy trembling mass of a new woman in labor was brought in on a stretcher, and Falada lowered his eyes before it. He wrapped Ambergris in a tiny diaper and laid her in his breast pocket. He thanked everyone, paid the small fee that was charged here for a head birth, and betook himself to his doctor. The doctor examined the girl through a sharp magnifying glass and granted her her first earthly nourishment, which consisted of a drop of patchouli perfume. "And what should I do now?" asked Falada, a little embarrassed about his new circumstances. "Nothing," answered the doctor. "I still plan to raise Ambergris. After all, I do have some ideals." "Nonsense," said the doctor, and raised his hands to heaven. "Raising children is a crime against humanity." The father made a stubborn face. Then there was a knocking at his heart, and he took Ambergris out of his breast pocket to see what she desired. She leapt out of his hand, grew up and vanished, and all that in a fast and breathtaking instant. A tiny diaper hung from Ambergris's round pink bevel, like the eggshell on a chick. "She's gone out onto the street naked," shouted Falada. "She'll be locked up." "Maybe the tree of knowledge was already swimming in her wake," smiled the doctor, and took his hat. "Or an atom," cried the father, and they hastily left the house. But they ran into a major quandary while in the search for the lone naked girl. Following Ambergris's example, all the young girls had pulled their dresses over their heads, and the flower sellers had their hands full fastening white daisies onto thousands of round pink bevels. And then I'll just skip it forward a little bit because it goes on. But Ambergris gives birth to all these daughters. And so Falada, the father, calls the doctor again and is asking what to do now that there's all these daughters. Once upon a time, a small, hopeful idea had promenaded in Falada's head because the lonely fellow had wished for a daughter, and now a huge flock of female fiends were cooking and roasting and baking and knitting and laughing and smoking, crisscrossed every which way, and Falada thoughtfully made his doctor aware of this. The odor of boiled down concentrate and boiled away vapors drew from the lower rooms into his nose while he telephoned with his doctor. "We are currently 1 to 300 people who were completely accidentally fathered, conceived, and delivered from valerian. Ambergris, wherever you look, who will pay for this?" "Not I," said the doctor with certainty, "but one calls them valerian aids, and when the scent of newness volatilizes in them, and when they are not allowed to smell like valerian, then they will have to die, having been hardly born. I'll stop by your place in a moment." The father Falada paced uneasily around the room, and a daughter quietly pushed herself against his heart, as small as before. In a feigned distractedness he clenched his fingers together around her and balled his fist, and from the lower rooms upward mischief was made and there was laughter at work. The doctor came in and looked over the valerian brood with a quick glance. The spitting images carried each other around on their backs, hung themselves on the lamps and in the curtains, or stuck themselves in each other's mouths like bonbons. Perplexed, the father raised his arms, and the first or third born fell from his fingers with a black face and her tongue hanging out. "You can't get rid of them like that," the doctor cried unwillingly, and sucked a tear shed by the strangled ones into his pipette. The father, however, laid Ambergris in his postcard album as a souvenir and weighted it down with thick books, because he wanted to press her so that he could glue her into his stamp album later. The porcelain police were brought in, and a total of 666 valerian aides were put in jail for breach of domestic peace, and from there, the very next day, 666-fold cases of death straight into the crematorium. But as they began to burn, the cats came by because the air smelled like valerian, and the cats rolled rapturously on the ground, and their meows sounded like Japanese celebratory music. "I escaped one more time," said Falado at his window, grown lonely once again, and he watched the smoke climb out of the crematorium. "Nonsense," said the doctor in a gentle voice. "Show me your ear for a moment, so that we can take this story out of the world the same way that it came into the world." And Falada did as he was told. The doctor emptied the tears of the dying Ambergris from his pipette into Falada's ear, and carefully closed it up with a little ball of wax. "She will neither escape nor multiply," said the doctor, "and sometime will grow together around her like Sleeping Beauty's thicket. Till the next time we take a look at one another, my friend." Falada went about his business, and only sometimes, when the mood irresistibly took him in the evening before going to bed, would he slowly hold the valerian bottle to his ear, and his ear would become an eye with which he could look into an endless remote distance at whose far edge a little girl sat in the snow of loneliness and played with her fingers, with the postal service of his thoughts, which did not always fall short of its goal. He sent her a pink and white striped peppermint stick and left it at that. My days inclined toward their end. Enough of the gruesome game, the wonderful last hour, will it not appear, in dust and earth become and become dust, and send the everlasting winter. Round about it became evening and travelled with me, who had become a blessed child again, into the land of how the where. O winds, thousand brothers, let me pass away in your breath. Unica.